Hello everyone, my name is Mimi. Welcome back to my channel. 2 years ago, I uploaded a short video for Mermay and it ended up going semi-viral. It's still my most viewed video with around 600,000 views, and a lot of my current subscribers actually found me through that video. The doll was a pretty literal expression of everything I love, so this year, I wanted to push the idea further and make something that felt more elevated. I originally wanted to upload this video in May, so it would line up with Mermaid. But while working on this doll, I completely fell in love with the project, and I wanted to give it a semi-proper shoot instead of just filming everything at home by myself. My close collaborators weren't available until early June, so that's why my Mermaid video is being uploaded in June. I hope you guys can forgive me. You're probably wondering, Mimi, what's with the title of this video? So let me explain. Designers often have muses, people whose presence, look, and energy continuously inspire the way they create. A muse is more than just a reference or a face. They can shape the mood of a project, influence the way ideas take form, and become part of a designer's visual language. For me, one of those people is a model I've worked with and continue to work with. She has such a striking high fashion look, and there's something about her features and presence that always sparks ideas for me. Some faces just hold a certain tension and beauty that make you want to create, and she has exactly that kind of effect on me. The model I'm talking about is the same one I collaborated with for my wearable art piece video. Since then, we've also worked together on a fashion shoot during Seoul Fashion Week, and on several fittings through the fashion-focused YouTube channel I co-founded with a former designer colleague. What you're seeing here is footage from the shoot we did last month, featuring my own designs worn by my Muse model. So, for this project, I wanted to create a doll inspired by her. Not simply as a copy of her likeness, but as a way of translating the feeling she gives me creatively into a sculpted form. So that explains the Muse model part of the title. And here is the finished 3D model of the doll. I originally began sculpting with a more realistic approach in mind, but later decided to lean into a more stylized doll look instead. I think I mentioned this in a previous video, but the whole reason I got a 3D printer was to create my own ball-jointed dolls. It still feels a little unreal that I'm finally able to do that, because sculpting a BJD was always something that intimidated me. It's not just about sculpting, it also requires a lot of careful engineering and 3D modeling. A couple of years ago, I did try making my own BJD. At the time, I was still quite new to 3D modeling, so the sculpt was very rough, and since I didn't have a 3D printer yet, getting a sample printed was very expensive. So I guess you could say this is my second attempt at creating my own BJD. For some reason, the parts near the edge of the build plate kept failing, so I ended up placing everything closer to the center. Because of that, it took more print sessions to get all the pieces printed properly. After curing the printed parts, I went over each piece with lower grit sandpaper. Resin prints usually don't show obvious layer lines, but the support marks still need to be cleaned up, and the surface has a slight sheen that I personally don't love. Once sanded, the parts have this beautifully smooth, matte texture that feels almost like silkstone when you touch them. Once the sanding was done, I strung the pieces together to test the posability. The articulated shoulder parts add such a nice range of motion, and I love how they allow the doll to hold more dramatic, high-fashion poses. I have to admit I was a little worried about the articulation. It felt like I was diving headfirst into a very complicated joint system, probably more complicated than I should have started with. But I'm honestly so happy with how the doll turned out. Now that I'm happy with how she poses, it's time to unstring her and move on to the face up and body blushing. After giving the face 3 coats of Mr. Super Clear sealant, I started blushing the face and lips. I like using pale pink, a little bit of blue, some tan tones and reds to add subtle accents, bring warmth and depth back into the face, and really bring out the sculpted features. I wanted to give her subtle smoky eyes to really accentuate that fierce look, so I added black pastel dust around the eyes. a natural color gradation takes quite a few layers to build up, so if you're planning to add this kind of soft gradient, it's better to start early and slowly build up the color little by little. After adding a light eyeliner around the eyes, I went back in with more blushing to really bring out the color in the face. I finally took my own advice and went out to get some tracing paper so I could make an eyebrow template. I've been obsessed with the bleached brow look, so for her brows I'm using a tan yellow color instead of going too dark. I kept going back and forth, slowly building up the colors and adding more details. Here, I'm adding more gradient around the eyes and using a deeper red pastel to add some soft shadows to the lips. And just a reminder, when the colors stop building up, spray another layer of Mr. Super Clear Sealant before continuing. Also, always wear a filtration mask and spray in a well-ventilated area, because safety is not optional. Once I was happy with the opacity of the colors, I moved on to the finer details. For this face-up, I actually didn't end up using gouache or acrylic paint. I didn't want the lines to look too sharp or graphic. I wanted them to stay soft and subtle, so I picked up pigment from a watercolor pencil using a fine nail art brush with a little bit of water. I'm really loving how the face-up is turning out. It still reminds me of my Muse model, but in a completely different way. Do you have someone you consider your muse? Let me know in the comments. After fine-tuning the details, softening some of the harsher blushing, adding 3D eyelashes, and putting in the eyes that I printed and painted myself, the face-up is finally done. I was honestly dreading this part because I was so afraid of ruining my very own BJD, but I'm so happy with how she turned out. I usually tend to push things to the extreme, but with this face-up I feel like I stopped at just the right place. She is now completely body blushed. And I also coated the joint sockets with resin and added faux suede. This helps her hold poses better and prevents the parts from scratching against each other. For the wig, I purchased it from my favorite BJD and doll related one-stop online shop. Ever since I was very young, I've been drawn to religious imagery. Growing up in a deeply religious family, I was surrounded by iconography that felt both sacred and intimidating. It was austere, yet grand. Fearful, yet beautiful. There was a quiet power in it that I didn't fully understand at the time, but it always stirred something in me. That is exactly why I was so drawn to Mother Mary, starring Anne Hathaway. Although it wasn't the kind of movie I would usually go for, I did enjoy it. But more than anything, I absolutely loved the costumes and the way they reinterpreted religious iconography. The film's costumes, along with my research into John Galliano's Dior archive, inspired me to create this look for my model. And for the doll, I wanted to make something that would complement it. While doing more research on the costumes from Mother Mary, I realized that some of the key pieces were actually designed by Iris van Herpen. So I started researching Iris van Herpen, a designer whose work often feels less like traditional clothing and more like wearable sculpture created through cutting-edge technology. I was especially inspired by her water-like dresses, and I wanted to see if I could create something with that same fluid, sculptural feeling using clear resin and my 3D printer. I've been having so much fun experimenting with clear resin, so of course I wanted to use it for this project too. I'm going to create a short dress inspired by splashing water and style it with a dramatic crushed velvet mermaid skirt. For the printed dress, I also want to incorporate a face, almost like a mermaid emerging from the sea. Fully inspired, I finally started sculpting. But I'd never tried to sculpt something that looked like water before, so honestly, it felt pretty overwhelming at first. I started with a basic sphere, then used the gizmo and move tools to stretch, bend, and shape it into something more fluid. At that point, I still wasn't very confident, and I had no idea if I would end up with anything I'd actually want to share, so I didn't even bother recording the process until I finally got a shape that I liked. Sculpting something organic like water is especially difficult, because you have to be intentional without making it feel too controlled. When you really observe the movement of water, it may look chaotic at first, but there's a hidden rhythm and order underneath. Trying to capture that sense of calculated spontaneity was one of the hardest parts of this process. For the face in the middle of the water dress, I decided to add Tilda Swinton's face. I've never met her in person, but I genuinely consider her my greatest muse. And when I say I've seen all of her movies, I really mean all of them. Orlando is still one of my favorite films, and her performance in that movie has stayed with me for years. I've been sculpting Tilda Swinton-inspired faces, hoping that one day I'll create a gigantic Tilda-inspired BJD. For this project, I'm using one of the faces I already sculpted. After adding a few final touches, the water dress was complete. I'm honestly so happy I pushed myself to try this. Sometimes you just have to stop overthinking and go for it. To get a better idea of how it might look in clear resin, I changed the material to refraction, and now I'm just hoping the actual print turns out as magical as it looks on screen. So that explains the other half of the title. I was inspired by the costumes from the film Mother Mary and used that as the starting point to design a high fashion mermaid look. And this is how the water dress turned out after printing. Because it was too big to print in one piece, I had to separate it into 3 parts. Once the print was done, I sanded the whole surface with lower grit sandpaper, then applied 5 coats of glossy Mr. Super Clear to bring back the transparency. I know some people use clear resin for this, but I can never get an even coat. Some areas always end up clearer than others. Mr. Super Clear takes more time, but it gives me a much more even finish. Now let's move on to pattern making. I started by stringing together the body parts that needed fitting, then wrapped the body with several layers of cling wrap to protect the surface and create a base for the pattern. On top of the cling wrapped area, I added several layers of masking tape. After building up enough layers of cling wrap and masking tape, I used a fine liner to draw in the seam lines for the pattern. Make sure to label each piece as you go so you know exactly what part it is and where it needs to be placed. After finalizing all the seam lines, I carefully cut the pattern pieces away from the body. Since this body hadn't been sanded yet, I wasn't too precious about a few light scratches, but if you're working on a finished doll body, definitely take your time and be careful. At first, I thought I'd make a full dress to go underneath the 3D printed water dress, but I ended up just making the skirt without the bustier. Next, I transferred all the pattern pieces onto cardstock. This is where I refined the lines, cleaned up the shapes, and added a 0.5 cm seam allowance to each piece. Off camera, I cut the pattern pieces in calico and made a toile. I've attempted doll scale corseted bustiers a few times before, but at such a small scale, it's always been difficult to get the fit and details exactly how I want it. Even though this doll is larger, I was still a bit nervous about trying again. But despite a few sewing mistakes, I was really happy with the fit and proportions of the toile. It made me feel that with a bit more care on the final fabric, I could actually achieve a clean, professional looking finish. For the final pattern adjustment, I lengthened the skirt and added extra flare toward the hem to achieve that dramatic mermaid silhouette. Now let's move on to the sewing. For the final step of the skirt, I'm finishing the hem with an invisible hand stitch. I really love this part of the process because quiet, detailed hand sewing feels so therapeutic to me. And with that, she's finally complete. Now it's time for the photo shoot.
Elegance, power,
This project had so many firsts for me, which made it both exciting and a little daunting. It became much bigger than I originally planned, but I feel like I was able to bring together my love for fashion and dolls to create something really special. I'd love to do more projects like this, so let me know if you'd like to see that. Thank you so much for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to like and subscribe.